The ballroom was alive with laughter, music, and the rustling of elegant gowns as guests swirled and twirled in an air of anticipation. The grand chandelier above cast a soft glow, illuminating the faces of the finest society in London. At the center of it all stood the Duke of Ashford, his sharp eyes scanning the room. As his father, the Duke of Ashford Sr., leaned in to speak, his voice held a strange sense of urgency. "Take the prettiest one," his father murmured, a sly grin creeping onto his face. "Make your choice wisely, son. The season is nearly over, and it's time to pick a bride." The words were casual, almost as if choosing a wife were no more than selecting a rare flower from a garden. But the Duke, for reasons known only to him, didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes drifted across the sea of beautiful women. His gaze lingered on Rosalind, a vision in soft pink silks, with golden locks that seemed to shimmer in the candlelight. 1,000 suitors had already admired her, and she had no shortage of admirers tonight. She was the picture of grace and beauty. But then his gaze shifted. There in the corner of the room stood Catherine, her brown hair hidden beneath a simple bonnet, her face less radiant than Rosalind's but marked with an unexpected, almost unspoken depth. Catherine was not what the world called beautiful, at least not in the way Rosalind was. Yet there was something about her, the way she stood with quiet poise, the way she spoke to the elderly ladies without a hint of pretense, the way her sharp eyes seemed to take in every detail of the room. The Duke didn't hesitate. "I choose Catherine," he said plainly, his voice carrying over the room. A murmur passed through the crowd. Whispers filled the air as the ballroom fell into a stunned silence. His father looked at him, a frown curling his lips. "Catherine?" he asked, his tone a mixture of disbelief and confusion. "But she's plain. Don't you want someone like Rosalind? She's everything a duke should seek in a wife." The Duke's eyes remained fixed on Catherine. "I don't seek a wife for beauty alone, father. I seek someone who will challenge me, someone who can see beyond my title." He spoke the words slowly, as if his decision was something he had already known for a long time. Catherine's eyes widened as she heard her name. She had always been the quieter one, the one who would never be picked by someone like the Duke. She felt her heart race in her chest, unsure whether to feel honored or completely bewildered. She couldn't fathom why a man of such stature would choose her, a woman with no extraordinary beauty, no remarkable fortune, and no exceptional family connections. But there he was, standing tall, his eyes never leaving hers. As the first waltz began, the Duke extended his hand to Catherine. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of the propriety of the situation, but when his gaze never wavered, she reluctantly placed her hand in his. The crowd parted as the music began, and the Duke led her onto the dance floor. The silence in the room was deafening, as everyone turned to watch them move together. In that first waltz, as their feet glided across the polished floor, the Duke whispered, "I've been watching you, Catherine, for months now. I've seen the way you look at the world, not with judgment, but with understanding. You see people for who they truly are, not for their appearance or their title." Catherine's cheeks flushed, her mind racing. How could he know such things about her? She had barely spoken to him, let alone revealed anything of her inner thoughts. How could you know anything about me?" she stammered, her voice trembling slightly. The Duke smiled, a rare, almost secretive smile. "I know much more than you think. I know you've spent countless hours helping your family with their debts. I know you volunteered at the orphanage. And I know you spent all last winter learning how to read Greek. You're not like the others, Catherine. You've never been the one to seek attention, and that's why I choose you." Catherine's heart raced, but not from the excitement of the dance. No, it was the shock of his words, the way he seemed to know her so intimately without her ever sharing a thing. It was as though he had been watching her, waiting for a moment like this to speak. The dance ended, and the room erupted into applause, but Catherine could hardly hear it over the pounding in her ears. She was left standing, utterly stunned, as the Duke took a step back. He bowed low, his expression unreadable. "May I court you, Catherine?" he asked, his voice low, just for her ears. "I don't want to be like the others, choosing a woman for her beauty. I want to know the woman who sees the world differently, the one who thinks beyond appearances." Catherine stood frozen, unsure of what to say. Her family had always told her to expect nothing from a man like the Duke. He was a figure out of reach, someone who could have any woman he desired. But here he was, asking for her, the plain girl in the corner. Her mother's icy gaze caught hers from across the room, and for a moment, Catherine felt the weight of her family's expectations, the pressure to reject this offer and steer the Duke toward Rosalind. But in that moment, she knew there was more at stake than just the pressure to please her family. The Duke was sincere, his words, his gaze, they all spoke of something real. But could she trust him? Would she be able to live a life defined not by beauty, but by the choices she made? And just as her thoughts spun in circles, the Duke's voice interrupted. "May I have permission to court you, Catherine?" he asked once again, his expression unwavering. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath as Catherine's heart skipped a beat. Would she accept his offer, or would she defy her family and live her own truth? The morning after the Duke's unexpected choice, Catherine awoke to a suffocating silence in the house. The grandeur of the night before, filled with laughter and music, now seemed like a distant dream. She could still hear the echoes of the waltz, the Duke's gaze piercing through the ballroom, but now, as the sunlight streamed to the curtains, everything felt heavier. Her family's reactions had been nothing short of cold and unforgiving. As she entered the breakfast room, her mother's icy stare was the first thing she noticed. Rosalind, her sister, barely acknowledged her presence. Her lips curled into a sneer that didn't hide the resentment bubbling beneath the surface. The tension was palpable, thickening the air as Catherine sat down, her heart pounding in her chest. Her father, looking more distant than ever, didn't speak a word, his focus solely on the morning paper. It was as if the Duke's attention had exposed a crack in the family's facade, one that Catherine could feel widening with every passing second. Rosalind was the first to speak, her voice sharp and dripping with venom. "How could you let this happen, Catherine? The Duke of Ashford, of all people, and you were his choice? It's humiliating." The words cut through Catherine like a blade, each syllable stinging deeper than the last. Catherine had always been the one to hide in the background, never drawing attention to herself. But now, her very existence seemed to be a source of ridicule. Her mother, ever the one to seek the best match for her daughters, joined in, her voice laced with frustration. "This is a complete disaster, Catherine. The Duke has chosen the most plain and forgettable one, and you let him." It felt as though the room was closing in on her, suffocating her. How could they say such things? How could they judge her for something she hadn't chosen? Her father, finally lowering the paper, glanced at her with a resigned expression. His silence was deafening, and Catherine knew that he had already made up his mind about what needed to happen next. He set the paper down with deliberate slowness and met her gaze with cold, calculating eyes. "Catherine, you must reject him. Tell the Duke you cannot accept his courtship. Redirect him to Rosalind. You cannot let this absurdity continue. Do it for the family, for your future." His words hit Catherine like a heavy blow, each syllable robbing her of any hope that this might be a different kind of future. The weight of her father's command felt impossible to ignore. How could she go against him? And yet, something inside her rebelled. The Duke had seen something in her, something no one else had ever noticed. He had chosen her for who she was, not for her looks, and that realization made Catherine feel something she had never felt before, worth. But the pressure from her family was mounting, suffocating every ounce of confidence she had built. How could she reject the Duke? How could she turn away from something that felt so real, so different from everything she had known? Before she could respond, the door opened, and the butler entered with a message. "The Duke of Ashford is here to see you, Miss Catherine," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of an impending decision. Catherine's heart skipped a beat. The Duke was here? Now! Her mind raced as she rose from the table, the weight of her family's expectations still heavy on her shoulders. Her father gave her a brief nod, a signal that she had no choice but to meet the Duke and follow through with his request, no matter how difficult it might be. She walked through the grand corridors of the house, her mind swirling with 1,000 thoughts. The Duke was waiting in the drawing room, his tall frame silhouetted against the sunlight pouring through the windows. As he stood to greet her, Catherine couldn't help but notice how different he seemed from the other men in her life. There was something about him, something genuine, something that made her heart flutter with uncertainty. "Miss Catherine," he said with a warm smile, his deep voice soothing her nerves, though the tension in her chest remained. "I hope you slept well after the ball." His words were kind, but there was an edge of curiosity in his eyes, as though he could sense her inner turmoil. Catherine gave a small nod, forcing a smile as she took a seat across from him. The Duke's gaze never left her face, and for a moment it felt as though the entire world had disappeared. "I trust you are well," he continued, his tone gentle but filled with an undeniable sincerity. "But I must admit, I have been thinking about our conversation last night. I understand the complexities surrounding my choice, and I know that the expectations placed upon you are immense. I want to be clear. My intentions are not to make things more difficult for you. I simply ask for the chance to prove myself." Catherine blinked, unsure of how to respond. The weight of her family's disapproval was still fresh in her mind, and she wasn't sure she could risk defying them. But the Duke's presence, his honesty, and the quiet conviction in his voice made her hesitate. He was not like the men her family would have chosen for her. He was not asking for her beauty or her social standing. He was asking for something far more rare, a chance to know her. "Please, Miss Catherine," he continued, his voice softening. "I asked for only 2 weeks. 2 weeks to show you that my feelings are genuine, that this is not a whim, but something I truly believe in. Let me prove that I see you, not for your looks, but for who you are inside. I will come back in 2 weeks, and then, if you feel the same, I will ask you to be my Duchess." His words hung in the air between them, a promise, a challenge, and a risk. Catherine felt her heart pound in her chest as she processed what he was asking. 2 weeks. That was all he wanted. A small amount of time, yet it felt like an eternity. Could she give him that chance? Could she ignore the demands of her family and follow her own heart? The uncertainty of her decision loomed over her. But as she looked into the Duke's eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment that could change everything. 2 weeks, she finally whispered, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "In 2 weeks, I will make my decision." The Duke's face brightened, a smile spreading across his lips as he stood and bowed to her. "Thank you, Miss Catherine. I will return in 2 weeks. And I promise you I will not waste that time." As Catherine walked back to her family, the weight of her decision seemed to press down on her with even more force. 2 weeks. That was all she had. The Duke's proposition was simple, but the consequences of her choice were anything but. Would she stand by her family's wishes? Or would she take a chance on something that could change her life forever? The decision loomed large before her, and Catherine knew that nothing would ever be the same. The first week of courtship passed in a haze of uncertainty for Catherine. She had agreed to the Duke's request for 2 weeks, yet with each passing day, her resolve weakened. She had expected to feel more certain about her decision, but instead, she felt increasingly torn. The Duke's presence had brought something into her life that she wasn't prepared for, an awareness of her own worth, a recognition that she had never experienced before. The whispers in the halls of her family's estate had grown louder as the week went on, rumors circulating about Catherine's sudden rise in status. Some said she had used dark arts to win the Duke's favor. Others whispered that he had been bewitched by her plainness, a mystery that intrigued him. Catherine tried to ignore the gossip, but it seeped into her thoughts, twisting her own perceptions of what was happening. Was the Duke truly in love with her, or was he simply intrigued by something she didn't understand? Despite the rumors, Catherine had agreed to meet the Duke for several outings, each one more intimate and revealing than the last. The first had been a visit to a museum, where the Duke treated her as an intellectual equal, engaging her in deep discussions about art and history. For the first time in her life, Catherine felt seen for her mind, not just her appearance. The Duke listened to her thoughts, asked her opinions, and seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. This was no ordinary courtship. But as the week continued, Catherine began to question if this was simply an illusion, a fleeting moment of validation that would soon vanish. The Duke's affection seemed too good to be true, and Catherine struggled to reconcile the man he presented with the man she had heard about in society. The Duke known for his charm and wealth, a man who could have anyone he wanted. She feared that she was merely a diversion, a temporary interest that would soon fade away once the Duke grew bored. However, their next meeting was at the Duke's estate, where Catherine found herself walking through the magnificent grounds, the grandiosity of the estate overwhelming her senses. The Duke, ever the gracious host, had invited her to visit his home, but it was not the opulence that struck her most. It was the way he interacted with her, as if they were equals, as if she mattered, during their time at the estate. Catherine had noticed that the Duke was struggling with his accounting records, his estate affairs more chaotic than he would admit. Without thinking, she had offered her help, her sharp mind finding patterns and solutions in the numbers that eluded him. The Duke's gratitude was palpable, and as they sat together in his study, discussing financial matters, Catherine realized that he valued her intellect just as much as he had valued her compassion. This was not a simple courtship for social gain. It was something far deeper. But with each act of kindness, with each conversation, Catherine's doubts grew. She overheard a conversation between two servants in the hallway one evening, their voices hushed but unmistakable. "Did you hear? Lady Catherine is so plain. It must be some sort of trick. The Duke can have any woman he wants, and yet he chose her. There must be something else going on." The word stung, cutting through Catherine's confidence like a blade. It was one thing to hear such gossip in the halls of her own estate, but to hear it in the Duke's home, it unsettled her. Was the Duke truly in love with her, or was this all part of some scheme, a bet perhaps? The whispers of the servants gnawed at her, and for the first time in the week, she considered ending the courtship. It would be easier to reject him now, before things became more complicated, before her heart became further entangled. But just as she was about to voice her concerns, the Duke invited her to a village charity event, where they spent the day volunteering at a local orphanage. The day was filled with laughter and shared purpose, the Duke's support for her compassion evident as they worked side by side. The sight of the children's faces lighting up as they received clothes and food was a reminder of why Catherine had chosen to be involved in charity work in the first place. The Duke, seeing her in her element, seemed to admire her even more. He didn't just see her as a woman to be courted, but as a partner, someone he could trust and rely on. Despite the rumors, the doubts, and the fears that lingered in the back of her mind, Catherine found herself beginning to believe that perhaps the Duke's feelings were sincere. But then came the rumors. As they walked through the market after the charity event, Catherine overheard a group of women whispering behind her back, "She's not even pretty. What's he seeing in her? He must have been under some spell." The words stung, but Catherine refused to let them show. She had heard them before, and though they still hurt, she had learned to let them roll off her back. It wasn't the first time she had been judged for her appearance, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But this time it felt different. The Duke had made it clear that he valued her for more than just her looks. He had never once made her feel less than his equal. Yet the whispers continued to haunt her. Could they be right? Was the Duke simply blinded by something superficial? Catherine struggled with these conflicting thoughts, unsure of what to believe. She began to question the authenticity of the Duke's feelings, wondering if he was simply caught up in the thrill of the chase. But despite her doubts, she couldn't deny the connection that had formed between them. The way he looked at her with admiration, the way he made her feel like she mattered. And then came the breaking point. One night, as Catherine stood alone in the garden, lost in thought, she overheard a conversation between two guests at a ball. "She's so plain. It's hard to believe the Duke would choose her. There must be something else going on." The words were almost identical to the ones she had heard earlier, but this time they struck her harder. She could feel the weight of the gossip pressing down on her, could feel the doubt creeping in. Was this all a mistake? Should she end the courtship before it went any further? But just as Catherine was about to retreat from the garden, the Duke appeared, his presence like a beacon of light in the darkness. "Catherine," he said, his voice soft but filled with urgency. "Please meet me tonight in the garden. I need to talk to you." His words were a lifeline, pulling her back from the edge of her doubts. She wasn't sure what he wanted to say, but for the first time in a week, Catherine felt a sense of clarity. The time for hesitation was over. The Duke was waiting, and in 2 weeks, she would have to make a choice. Would she let the rumors dictate her fate, or would she take the risk and trust in the Duke's sincerity? The moonlight that bathed the garden that night seemed to hold an air of secrecy, the gentle rustling of leaves whispering the beginning of something that would change Catherine's life forever. The Duke's invitation had been a surprise, and though she had intended to ignore it, something deep within her had urged her to go, to hear him out, even though doubt swirled like a storm in her heart. As she approached the garden, her steps were hesitant, her mind conflicted between her family's expectations and the quiet yearning that had slowly grown inside her over the past few days. When she reached the familiar garden path, the Duke was already waiting, his form cast in shadow, his face barely illuminated by the flickering lanterns hanging from the trellis. His presence was commanding, yet there was a softness in his gaze that made Catherine's heart skip a beat. "Catherine," he said, his voice low but steady, as though he had been waiting for this moment. And now that it had arrived, he knew the gravity of what he was about to say. "I must confess something to you, something I have never told anyone else." His words caught Catherine off guard. She had never expected this from him, not after everything that had transpired in such a short time. She had believed him to be a man of immense strength, of unshakable confidence. Yet here he was, standing before her, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I was once engaged to another woman," he continued, his voice thick with an emotion that Catherine couldn't quite place. "Her name was Lady Beatrice, and she was everything that society wanted her to be. She was beautiful, graceful, everything that was expected of a woman in my position. But she betrayed me, Catherine." His words hung in the air, and Catherine felt a shiver run down her spine. She had heard whispers about the Duke's past, about Lady Beatrice, the beautiful fiancée who had once captured his heart, but hearing it from his lips was a different thing entirely. "She left me for someone else, without explanation," the Duke continued, his gaze turning distant, as though he were lost in a memory he wished he could forget. "I was shattered, and it took me years to understand why. I was so focused on her beauty, her social status, that I never saw who she truly was. It wasn't until I met you, Catherine, that I realized what I had been missing." The words were like a balm to Catherine's soul, and she felt the weight of them settling in her chest. For so long, she had feared that her plainness, her lack of beauty, would be a curse that kept her from ever being truly loved. Yet here was the Duke, confessing that it was precisely her authenticity, her inner beauty, that had drawn him in. "You're not like her," he said, his voice tender, as he stepped closer to her. "You never tried to be anyone else. I fell in love with your sincerity, your intelligence, and your heart. I watched you from the moment we met, and I knew, even then, that you were different. And now, after everything we've been through, I can't imagine my life without you." The Duke's words were like a revelation, and for a moment, Catherine was overwhelmed with emotion. She had been uncertain, confused by her own feelings, but now she understood. The Duke wasn't interested in her because of her appearance or her social standing. He had seen her for who she truly was, and that recognition meant more to her than any compliment about her looks ever could. But before she could respond, the Duke stepped closer, his hands gently cupping her face, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "I know this is all happening so quickly, and I know there are many who doubt us, who doubt me, but I want you to know that my feelings for you are real. I don't want to wait any longer. Catherine, I want to marry you, and I want to do it now. I know it's unconventional, but I can't bear the thought of losing you. Will you marry me?" His words were both a plea and a promise, and Catherine's heart raced in her chest as she looked into his eyes. She had never imagined that she would be standing in this garden, faced with such a monumental decision. Yet here she was. The weight of the moment hung heavily between them, and Catherine found herself at a crossroads. Her mind raced with thoughts of her family's disapproval, of the scandal that would surely follow. She had always been taught to follow the rules, to marry for security and status, but the Duke was offering her something else, something far more valuable. He was offering her love and the chance to choose her own path. As she looked at him, his earnest gaze never leaving hers, she realized that the decision was no longer about her family or society's expectations. It was about her. It was about what she wanted and what she was willing to risk for the chance to be truly happy. The silence stretched between them, and for a long moment, Catherine didn't know what to say. Her mind was clouded with fear, with the consequences of such a bold choice, but beneath it all was a quiet, unwavering truth. She had never felt more alive, more seen, more understood than she did in that moment. The Duke was not asking for her to be someone she wasn't. He was asking her to be herself, plain and simple, and to love him in return. And for the first time in her life, Catherine realized that she wanted to say yes. But just as she opened her mouth to speak, they were interrupted. A figure emerged from the shadows, and Catherine's heart sank as she recognized the familiar silhouette of Lady Beatrice. Her arrival was like a bolt of lightning, cutting through the moment with terrifying clarity. The scandal that Catherine had feared was no longer just a possibility. It was inevitable. Lady Beatrice stepped forward, her eyes cold with disdain as she fixed the Duke with a piercing gaze. "So this is your new love, Ashford?" she said, her voice dripping with bitterness. "The plain one, the one you've thrown away your future for?" The words were sharp, like daggers, and Catherine felt a wave of humiliation wash over her. But the Duke stood his ground, his expression hardening as he faced his former fiancée. "Lady Beatrice, your opinion no longer matters," he said firmly. "I have made my choice, and it is Catherine." The confrontation was intense, and for a moment, Catherine feared that the Duke would back down, that he would return to his former fiancée, the woman who had once held his heart. But the Duke's resolve never wavered. He turned to Catherine, his gaze softening as he took her hand in his. "I know this will cause a scandal," he said, his voice filled with determination. "But I will not let anyone take you from me. I love you, Catherine, and I will marry you no matter the consequences." The words were a declaration, a promise that Catherine could feel deep in her soul. Despite the scandal, despite the judgment of society, the Duke had chosen her, and in that moment, she knew that she would never be the same. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with obstacles and challenges, but the Duke had made it clear that he would face them with her, and that was all that mattered. Catherine's heart fluttered as the news of her engagement to the Duke was announced to society, but the exhilaration was soon overshadowed by the cold weight of reality. Her family's resistance had not waned, and neither had the whispers of society. As the days passed, the once sparkling promise of marriage began to feel more like a battle than a union of hearts. The Duke had fought for her, but now the true test had begun. The engagement was formal, and every eye in society was upon them. Her mother, still struggling with the idea that her daughter would marry the Duke, tried to maintain a facade of cordiality, but the tension was impossible to ignore. Rosalind, who had once been so sure of her own future, now stood in the shadows, her resentment barely concealed. Her cold remarks to Catherine were a constant reminder that the situation was far from resolved. But it was not just her family who made the engagement difficult. As Catherine and the Duke prepared for their upcoming wedding, Lady Beatrice returned to the scene, and with her, a storm of drama and sabotage. Her arrival in London was not a quiet one. She made it clear, through subtle and not-so-subtle ways, that she had no intention of relinquishing her claim on the Duke. She was, after all, the one he had been betrothed to before, and she had no intention of letting go of her position. She wove herself into the social fabric of London with a venomous grace, making sure that no opportunity passed without taking a jab at Catherine. At a society ball, Lady Beatrice made her move. Catherine had arrived in an exquisite gown, ready to make her first public appearance as the Duke's fiancée. But it wasn't the evening's dances or conversations that would remain in her memory. It was the moment Lady Beatrice made her dramatic entrance. Beatrice had purposely chosen to wear a dress of such extravagant proportions that it drew the attention of every guest. Her beauty, though cold and calculating, was undeniable, and she carried herself with a grace that made Catherine feel small in comparison. As the evening unfolded, Catherine felt the sting of Lady Beatrice's presence in every glance, every whispered word. Then, at the height of the ball, as Catherine made her way to the dance floor, disaster struck. A sharp rip echoed through the ballroom, and Catherine's face burned as she realized that her dress had been tampered with. The seams, which had been carefully constructed by the finest seamstress, had been subtly yet effectively ruined. The dress was no longer presentable, and the humiliation was palpable. As Catherine looked up, her eyes met Lady Beatrice's, and in that instant, Catherine knew it had been Beatrice's doing. Her malicious smile spoke volumes, confirming her role in the sabotage. The room had quieted, and all eyes were on Catherine as she stood there, a victim of a cruel scheme. But in the midst of the whispers, in the midst of her shame, a forceful voice rang out. The Duke, who had been conversing with a group of gentlemen, stormed toward the scene, his expression darkened with anger. He cut through the crowd with determination, his stride purposeful. "Beatrice," he said, his voice low and firm, "you will not do this. Not to her. Not to me." The Duke's words had the desired effect. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as Lady Beatrice's confident demeanor faltered. She glared at him, but there was no denying the power that he wielded, and the guests could sense the shift in the atmosphere. The Duke turned to Catherine, his anger softened by his genuine concern. "Catherine," he said, taking her hand in his, "you are not the cause of this. This is not your shame to bear. I will not allow anyone to treat you like this." It was a moment of uncharacteristic vulnerability for the Duke, but Catherine felt a surge of gratitude. Her family might still be unsure, the world might be against her, but the Duke was fighting for her. In that moment, she realized that this was not just about a wedding, not just about securing a future. It was about a partnership, a union built on trust and mutual respect. And yet, despite his public defense of her, the whispers in society continued. And so did Lady Beatrice's campaign of sabotage. The next blow came not at a ball, but in the form of a meeting with the Dowager Duchess, the Duke's formidable mother. She had, in Catherine's mind, always been a distant figure, one to be admired from afar, but never to be truly engaged with. But now, as her engagement to the Duke became official, Catherine was summoned to meet the Dowager Duchess in her private chambers. The invitation, though polite, carried an air of formality that made Catherine's stomach twist. She had heard rumors of the Dowager Duchess's sharp tongue and her coldness toward those she deemed unworthy. Yet when Catherine arrived at the estate, she was met not with disdain, but with unexpected warmth. The Dowager Duchess, though regal in every sense of the word, took her hand with gentleness that surprised Catherine. "My dear," she said softly, her eyes studying Catherine's face, "I know this must be difficult for you. You are not the first woman who has faced such trials, and you will not be the last. But you must understand that being with my son will not be easy. The world will test you, and you will be tested, but it is your strength that will define you, not your appearance." The words, though difficult to accept, struck Catherine with their truth. It was not her beauty that would win her place in society. It was her resilience, her ability to rise above the cruelty that awaited her. Catherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders, knowing that the Dowager Duchess understood her, that she too had faced challenges in her own life. The conversation with the Dowager Duchess marked a turning point for Catherine. Though Lady Beatrice's attacks grew more intense, Catherine found herself becoming more resolute, more determined to prove her worth. The Dowager Duchess had seen something in her that even Catherine had not fully understood. It was not just her intellect or her compassion that would make her a worthy match for the Duke. It was her strength, her capacity to weather the storms of life. But as Catherine was beginning to find her footing, the final blow came in the form of a rumor spread by Lady Beatrice. One so cruel and damaging that it threatened to undo everything Catherine had worked for. The rumor, though unfounded, was devastating. That Catherine had used her influence to manipulate the Duke into choosing her over Lady Beatrice. The accusation was absurd, but it gained traction among society's elite, and soon Catherine found herself once again the target of gossip and scorn. It seemed as though every step forward was met with 2 steps back, and Catherine's resolve began to falter. But it was in these moments of trial that Catherine found her true strength. She did not let the rumors break her. She did not let Beatrice's spiteful words define her. Instead, she turned to the one person who had always been by her side, the Duke. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, whether they came in the form of malicious rumors or the scorn of society. The road to their wedding was far from easy, but with each obstacle, Catherine grew stronger, and she realized that the greatest test of all was not how others saw her, but how she saw herself. And in that moment, she knew that she would never allow anyone to strip her of her worth again. As the days of the engagement trials wore on, the pressure on Catherine intensified. The rumors and malicious gossip never ceased, and every moment of joy seemed to be overshadowed by the weight of public opinion. Lady Beatrice, despite her failed attempts to win back the Duke, had not given up on her vendetta. Each time Catherine stepped into a social gathering, the whispers followed her like a shadow, poisoning every conversation. But it was not just the scandalous whispers that wore on Catherine. It was a doubt that began to gnaw at her own heart. Despite the Duke's unwavering support, Catherine could not escape the growing suspicion that she was not enough, that her plainness was a defect that even his love could not overcome. The seeds of doubt were planted by Beatrice's cruel insinuations and the subtle remarks of society, and Catherine found herself questioning the sincerity of her own feelings. Was she really deserving of the Duke's love, or was she simply a temporary obsession for a man who had been hurt in the past? One afternoon, while attending a garden party at one of the noble estates, the tension finally broke. The air was thick with the scent of flowers, but even the beauty of the setting could not conceal the simmering hostility that surrounded Catherine. Lady Beatrice, in her usual graceful yet venomous manner, had positioned herself near the Duke, her gaze trained on Catherine with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. As Catherine approached a group of guests, she overheard Beatrice speaking to another lady, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I find it fascinating how the Duke has chosen the most plain woman in the room. Surely he could have done better. But then, perhaps he's drawn to her intellect, though it does seem rather a stretch, don't you think?" The words pierced Catherine's heart, and she could feel her cheeks flush with embarrassment and shame. She wanted to confront Beatrice, to tell her that the Duke's choice was not a concern, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she forced herself to walk away, retreating to a quiet corner of the garden. She had grown accustomed to whispers, to the barbed comments, but this time, something inside her broke. As she stood by the fountain, the tears that she had so carefully held back finally spilled over, her sobs racking her body with the intensity of her emotions. She had fought so hard, tried so much, but it seemed like nothing she did could ever be enough to silence the criticism or to earn the respect she longed for. In that moment, her pain was too much to bear. She felt lost, disconnected from the strength that had carried her this far. She questioned everything: the Duke's love, her own worth, and whether she was truly capable of handling the life that awaited her as the Duchess. But just as the weight of despair seemed unbearable, the Duke appeared. His presence was like a beacon in the storm, his steady footsteps cutting through the quiet of the garden as he approached her. Without a word, he simply took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. He didn't ask her what was wrong. He didn't need to. He knew. "Catherine," he said softly, his voice full of an emotion that made her heart ache. "I've heard the whispers, and I know the rumors are getting worse. But I want you to know something. Those words do not matter. They never have. It is you I have chosen, and it is you I will always choose." His words were simple, yet they were like a balm to her bruised soul. The tenderness in his voice, the conviction in his eyes, made Catherine realize something she'd been too afraid to acknowledge. She had spent so much time doubting herself, doubting her worth. But the Duke had never once wavered in his feelings for her. He had seen her, truly seen her, and in that moment, Catherine understood that his love was not a fleeting infatuation. It was real. The doubts that had plagued her, the fear that she was not enough, began to dissipate, replaced by a clarity she hadn't felt before. She had been so focused on society's judgment, on the opinions of others, that she had failed to see the truth in front of her. The Duke loved her for who she was, not for her beauty or her social standing, but for the qualities that made her who she was. His unwavering support, his determination to fight for her, had proven that. And it was in that moment, as she stood by the fountain with him, that Catherine realized how much strength she had within herself. She wasn't just a woman the Duke had chosen. She was a woman who had fought for herself, who had navigated the complexities of her life, and had found the courage to stand tall in the face of adversity. She wasn't a plain, ordinary woman society tried to label her as. She was so much more. The conversation with the Duke changed everything. It rekindled the fire that had burned inside her when they first met, the determination to stand by him and prove to the world that she was worthy, not just his love, but of her own. It was then that Catherine made a decision. She would not be defined by the cruel whispers of society or the doubts that had crept into her heart. She would not let Lady Beatrice or anyone else take away what she had fought for. She would marry the Duke, not because of his title or his wealth, but because of the love they shared, a love built on respect and understanding. The day of the wedding was fast approaching, and though the pressure to conform to society's expectations was still ever present, Catherine had found her inner strength. She no longer cared about the judgment of others. She had found a man who loved her for who she was, and that was all that mattered. As the wedding day drew near, Catherine's relationship with her father, though still strained, began to shift. Her father had reluctantly accepted that the Duke was a man of integrity, someone who genuinely cared for her. It wasn't an easy reconciliation, but over time, he began to see that Catherine had made her own choices and that she had grown into the woman she was always meant to be. Rosalind, too, though she never fully understood Catherine's decision, began to soften. Their conversations, though still fraught with tension, took on a new tone, one of mutual understanding. The cracks in their relationship, though deep, began to heal. But even as Catherine stood on the precipice of her wedding day, she knew that the battle was not over. The rumors, the judgments, and the societal expectations would continue to loom over her. But she had changed. She was no longer the woman who had been afraid to stand out, afraid to speak her truth. She was a woman who had fought for her place in the world, who had learned to love herself despite all the obstacles in her path. And as she walked down the aisle to marry the Duke, the man who had seen her for who she truly was, she knew that nothing could take away the love they shared. She had found her place in the world, not through beauty or titles, but through the strength of her heart and the courage to be herself. The day Catherine had once thought would never come finally arrived, though it did not come without its fair share of tension and nerves. The Duke's unwavering support had carried her this far, yet the fear of public judgment remained a persistent shadow over her thoughts. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but Catherine could not help but feel the weight of the world pressing down upon her as she stood in the quiet solitude of her chamber. She was alone for the first time that day, surrounded only by the soft rustling of silk and the quiet clinking of jewelry. The dress she wore was a simple yet elegant creation, chosen not for its grandeur, but for its quiet elegance. There was no ostentation in the fabric, no elaborate embroidery to rival the gowns of society's elite. It was a gown that matched Catherine herself, unassuming, yet beautiful in its own right. She touched the fabric of her gown, feeling the soft silk beneath her fingertips, and felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. The path had not been easy, and she had faced more challenges than she had ever anticipated. From the whispers of society to the constant barrage of doubts from her family, Catherine had weathered a storm of judgment, and yet here she was, about to marry a man who had seen her for who she truly was. The Duke, her love, had never once cared for her beauty or her social standing. He had cared for her mind, her spirit, her character. He had seen past the surface and understood her in a way that no one else ever had. Her eyes, which had once been clouded with self-doubt, now shone with clarity. She was no longer the uncertain girl who had doubted her worth. She was a woman who had found her voice and had chosen her own path. But even as she stood there, preparing for the wedding, the anxiety of what lay ahead crept in. The eyes of society would be upon her, watching her every move, scrutinizing her every word. The pressure to conform to their standard of beauty, to live up to their expectations, was immense. And yet, as Catherine glanced at her reflection in the mirror, she found a strength within herself that she had not known existed. The woman staring back at her was not the fragile, self-doubting girl she had once been. She was a woman of conviction, a woman who had fought for the love she deserved, a woman who had chosen to marry for love, not for convenience. The wedding was to take place in a small chapel on the Duke's estate, far removed from the grandeur of society's most elaborate events. The Duke had insisted on a private ceremony, surrounded by only their closest family and friends. It was to be a moment that was entirely theirs, free from the prying eyes of the world. As Catherine walked down the aisle, her heart beat wildly in her chest. She walked alone, a symbol of her independence, her autonomy. The chapel was modest, but it was filled with an overwhelming sense of love and warmth. The soft flicker of candlelight cast shadows across the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of fresh flowers. The guests, though few in number, were the people who mattered most to them, those who had supported them through the trials of their courtship. As Catherine approached the altar, Her eyes locked with the Duke's, and in that moment, the world fell away. The ceremony was simple, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. The vows they exchanged were heartfelt and sincere, the promises they made to each other binding not by the weight of tradition, but by the depth of their love. Catherine's voice trembled as she spoke the words that would forever change her life, but she spoke them with conviction. I vow to stand by you, to love you in all things, in all seasons, in every trial and every triumph. I give you my heart, my soul, and my trust, now and forever. The Duke's eyes shone with emotion as he took her hand in his voice steady but filled with emotion as he vowed, I promise to love you, to honor you, and to protect you, now and always. You are the light of my life, the one who makes me whole, and I will choose you every day for the rest of my life. The moment was pure, untainted by the expectations of others, a union formed not by obligation, but by love. And as they exchanged the vows that would bind them for all time, Catherine felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. The wedding was followed by a quiet reception at the Duke's estate. The grand hall, though adorned with flowers and rich tapestries, was filled with an atmosphere of warmth and love, not the cold formality that usually accompanied such events. Catherine and the Duke shared their first dance as husband and wife, surrounded by friends and family who had supported them through the difficult months leading up to this moment. But even as they danced, as they celebrated their love, the world outside still judged them. Just as the evening was winding down, as Catherine and the Duke prepared to retire for the night, a familiar voice broke through the quiet. It was Lady Beatrice. Her presence, though not unexpected, sent a ripple of discomfort through the room. She stood at the entrance of the ballroom, her cold, calculated gaze sweeping over the crowd before locking on to Catherine and the Duke. So this is it then? Lady Beatrice's voice was dripping with sarcasm. The grand wedding, the love story of the century. How quaint. Her words cut through the atmosphere like a knife, and the room went still. Catherine felt away her gaze, but she refused to let it affect her. This day was hers, and no one, least of all Lady Beatrice, could take that away. The Duke stepped forward, his voice steady as he addressed Beatrice. Lady Beatrice, I would appreciate it if you would leave. You're no longer welcome here. The finality in his tone was unmistakable, and Beatrice, though visibly taken aback, did not argue. She glared at Catherine one last time, her eyes filled with spite, before she turned and left, her footsteps echoing in the silence that followed. The room slowly came back to life, the tension dissipating as the guests returned to their conversations. But Catherine felt a quiet victory. This day, this moment, was hers. The rest of the world could judge her all they wanted, but she had found the one thing that mattered, love, true and unconditional. As the night drew to a close, Catherine and the Duke retreated to their private quarters. The wedding night, though filled with anticipation and excitement, was also a moment of vulnerability. For Catherine, it was not just a physical act of marriage that mattered, but the emotional connection she had forged with the Duke. They were partners now, equals, bound not just by vows, but by the deep love and trust they had built over the course of their courtship. Their first night together was a quiet, tender affair, a celebration of the love they had found in each other. As they lay together, Catherine felt a sense of completeness that she had never known before. The world outside could continue to judge her, to whisper and gossip, but it no longer mattered. She had found her place in the world, not through beauty or status, but through the love of the man who saw her for who she truly was. And as she drifted off to sleep in his arms, she knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that would be filled with love, laughter, and the shared joys and struggles of life. The road ahead would not always be easy, but with the Duke by her side, Catherine knew that she could face anything. The future was theirs to shape together. The days that followed the wedding were both a retreat into quiet happiness and a return to harsh realities. Catherine had thought that once she married the Duke, life would settle into an unshakable peace. But she quickly learned that the road to true contentment was often paved with unexpected challenges. The newlyweds spent several weeks in the Duke's private estate, isolated from the noise of society, surrounded by the peace of nature and the warmth of each other's company. Yet, even in the sanctuary of their marriage, shadows from the past lingered. Catherine had begun to feel a sense of fulfillment that she had never known before, finding her place beside the Duke. She was no longer just a plain, unnoticed daughter in a wealthy family. She was a partner, a wife, a woman respected not only by her husband, but also by those who had once doubted her. The Duke's love had helped her shed the layers of self-doubt and fear that had defined her for so long. But as Catherine looked out the window one morning, she felt the stirrings of something heavier, something that had been waiting to confront her. It was a letter, a single letter that would soon change everything. The Duke had received word that her father was gravely ill. He had not been in the best health for some time, but the message now carried a sense of urgency, a request that could not be ignored. Catherine's heart sank as she read the letter, the words hitting her with the force of an unanticipated blow. The father she had once hoped to please, the father who had treated her with such coldness in the past, was now at death's door. She had not expected this moment to come so quickly. Though their relationship had been strained, the knowledge that she might never have the opportunity to resolve their differences filled her with a mixture of guilt and sorrow. Her father had never been one to express love, and the wounds of their past had never healed. But now, with his life hanging in the balance, Catherine could not ignore the call of duty. She had to return. The decision weighed heavily on her, and she shared her concerns with the Duke. His response, as always, was filled with understanding. He did not hesitate, did not question her need to be with her family. "We will go together," he said firmly, taking her hand in his. "I will be with you every step of the way as you face this. Your family may not have been kind to you, but I know you, Catherine. You are stronger than they realize. Let me stand beside you now." His words were a balm to her frayed nerves, and she realized in that moment how much her life had changed. The Duke had not only offered her his heart, but he had also offered her his unwavering support, a constant in the face of uncertainty. Together, they set out for a family estate. The journey was long, but it was filled with quiet conversations, tender moments shared between the newlyweds. As they arrived, Catherine's heart was heavy with anticipation. She had not seen her father in months, and the emotional distance between them still felt like a chasm that would never be crossed. The family estate, once a place of familiarity and security, now felt like a foreign land, its halls filled with memories she had long tried to escape. Her father's condition was worse than she had feared. He was weak, his once powerful frame reduced to a shadow of the man he had been. As Catherine stood by his bedside, she felt a wave of grief wash over her, not just for the man he had been, but for the father she had never truly known. Her father had been distant, strict, and often cruel in his expectations of her, but seeing him now, broken and vulnerable, stirred something in Catherine she hadn't expected. She wanted to feel anger, resentment for all the years of pain he had caused her, but instead, she felt a deep, aching sorrow. He was still her father, and the relationship they had, or had never had, was not something that could be easily forgotten. The Duke, ever the pillar of strength, stood quietly beside her, giving her the space she needed, but never straying far. Catherine was grateful for his presence, for his quiet reassurance that she was not alone in this. Her father's condition worsened rapidly over the next few days, and Catherine knew that time was running out. One afternoon, as she sat by his bedside, her father's eyes fluttered open. His voice, though weak, was still laced with authority. "Catherine," he rasped, his gaze flickering between her and the Duke, who had been quietly reading in the corner of the room. "I never thought I would see this day." The words stung, and Catherine could feel the weight of his judgment pressing down on her. He had never been one to offer praise, never one to admit when he was wrong. But in this moment, as she watched him struggle for breath, Catherine realized that he was not just acknowledging her marriage. He was acknowledging something far more profound. Her father had lived a life filled with pride and power, but now, in the face of his own mortality, he was forced to confront the truth of his actions. "I was wrong, Catherine," he whispered, his voice breaking. "All these years, I treated you like you were less than your sister, less than anyone else in the family. But you were never the problem. I never understood you, and I never tried. I see that now." The tears that Catherine had held back for so long began to fall, unbidden. She had spent her whole life trying to earn his approval, but in this moment, she realized that his approval no longer mattered. What mattered was that, at the end of his life, He had recognized her worth. She wasn't just a failure in his eyes anymore. She was his daughter, and she was worthy of love. The reconciliation, though brief and painful, was enough. Catherine offered him forgiveness, not for his sake, but for hers. "I forgive you, Father," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I forgive you, not for you, but for me." The words felt liberating, like a heavy weight being lifted from her shoulders. For years, she had carried the burden of his rejection, but now, with those words, she could let it go. Her father's final days were spent in quiet reflection. He passed away peacefully, surrounded by family, and though his death left a hole in her heart, Catherine knew that she had done what she could. The reconciliation had come too late, but it had come nonetheless. The Duke stood by her side the entire time, offering her comfort and strength. When it was over, Catherine felt a strange sense of relief. She had been given the opportunity to say goodbye, to forgive, and in doing so, she had found a new sense of closure. It was time to move forward. After her father's funeral, Catherine returned to the Duke's estate, but she carried with her something more than the memory of her father's passing. She carried a sense of peace, a sense of resolution that she had never known before. The journey that had begun with pain and self-doubt had come full circle, and now she was ready to embrace the future that was hers to shape, not based on the expectations of others, but based on her own choices. The Duke had always believed in her, even when she could not believe in herself, and now, together, they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. The trials of the past were behind them, and in their place was the promise of a new beginning. Catherine had not only found love in the Duke, but she had also found herself. She was no longer the girl who had sought approval from others. She was a woman who had found her voice, her strength, and her place in the world. The Duke, standing beside her, was the final piece of the puzzle. Together, they were unstoppable. And as they moved forward into their future, Catherine knew that she had everything she needed to face whatever challenges awaited them: love, strength, and the unwavering support of the man who had always seen her for who she truly was. 5 years had passed since that fateful day when Catherine had stood at the altar, exchanging vows with the man who had transformed her life in ways she never imagined possible. It had been a journey filled with trials, both internal and external. But now, as she walked through the lush gardens of Ashford Manor, Catherine marveled at how far she had come. The weight of her past struggles had been replaced with a quiet confidence, a sense of purpose that was as much a part of her as the air she breathed. She was no longer the shy, self-doubting woman who had once feared society's judgment. She was a force to be reckoned with, not because of her appearance, but because of the strength she had found within herself. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the grounds, Catherine paused to take in the view. The once quiet, overlooked woman was now a respected duchess, known not just for her beauty, but for her brilliance, her compassion, and her unshakable spirit. Her rise to prominence had not been easy. There had been moments of doubt, moments when the weight of expectation felt too heavy to bear. But through it all, Catherine had remained true to herself. And it was that authenticity, that quiet determination, that had earned her the respect of those around her. The rumors that once surrounded her had long since faded, replaced by admiration from those who had once doubted her. The transformation had not just been external. It had been a deep, internal change. Catherine had learned to value herself, not because of the approval of others, but because she had come to understand her own worth. She was no longer seeking validation. She was offering it to others, just as she had always deserved. Her relationship with the Duke had blossomed into a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. The love they shared was no longer just a love of a man and a woman. It was a love of two individuals who had grown together, who had supported each other through the most challenging times. Their bond was unbreakable, rooted in a foundation of trust, honesty, and shared experiences. They had faced society's scorn, her family's disapproval, and the whispers of the world, and had come out stronger on the other side. Their love had proven that it was not beauty or wealth that defined a relationship, but the strength of the connection between two people. The Duke, who had once seen Catherine for who she truly was, had never faltered in his devotion to her. Their marriage had been the beginning of a new chapter for both of them, one that had been filled with laughter, love, and growth. As Catherine sat down on a bench in the garden, She was joined by her sister Rosalind, who had changed in ways that Catherine had never expected. Rosalind, once consumed by jealousy and rivalry, had grown into her own person over the years. Her journey had been different from Catherine's, but had been no less significant. She had married a kind and gentle man, someone who saw her not just for her beauty, but for the person she was beneath the surface. Their relationship was a testament to the fact that love could grow in unexpected ways, and that even the most complicated relationships could be healed with time and understanding. Rosalind, now with children of her own, had begun to understand the lessons Catherine had learned years ago. They were no longer rivals. They were sisters, bound by the shared experiences of life. As Rosalind sat beside Catherine, she glanced at her with a smile. "You know, Catherine," she said softly, "I used to envy you. I thought you had it all. The love of the Duke, the respect of society. But now, I see that you didn't just gain those things. You earned them. You've always had something special inside of you. I just never saw it until now." Catherine's heart swelled at her sister's words, and for the first time, she saw Rosalind not as a beautiful, perfect sister who had once been her rival, but as a woman who had her own struggles, her own journey. They were equals now, and Catherine understood that the love they shared as sisters was stronger than any rivalry they had once felt. The conversation turned to their children, and as Catherine spoke of her own little ones, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had created a life for herself and her family that was grounded in love, not in appearances or the expectations of others. Her daughter, who had recently begun asking questions about beauty, was a reminder of how far Catherine had come. "Am I pretty, Mama?" her daughter had asked one evening, her wide eyes filled with innocence. Catherine had smiled, her heart full of love as she gently brushed her daughter's hair from her face. "You are beautiful, my love," she had said softly, "but what makes you truly beautiful is your heart. You are kind, you are smart, and you are brave. That is what makes you beautiful." The conversation with her daughter had reminded Catherine of the lessons she had learned throughout her life. The lessons of self-worth, of strength, and of the power of inner beauty. She had spent so many years struggling to meet the world's expectations. But now, she knew that true beauty came from within, and it was a lesson she was passing on to her children. As the evening drew to a close, Catherine found herself walking with the Duke through the manor, their hands intertwined. The world had changed so much since their first meeting, but the love they shared had remained a constant, a steady force that had seen them through every trial and every triumph. The Duke, ever the steady presence in her life, turned to her with a smile that still made her heart flutter, as it had the very first time they had met. "You changed my life, Catherine," he said softly, his voice filled with affection. "I would choose you again every time." His words were a reminder of the love they had built together, a love that had stood the test of time. The struggles of the past had shaped them, but it was a love they shared that had carried them through. And as they stood together in the quiet of the evening, Catherine knew that their love story was far from over. It was just beginning. Together, they had created a life full of meaning, a life built on love, respect, and the belief that true beauty lay in the strength of their hearts. And as Catherine and the Duke walked hand in hand, their future stretched out before them, bright with promise, filled with the certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as partners, as equals, and as the two people who had once defied the odds to be together. The journey that had started with a choice, his choice to see her for who she truly was, had led them to this moment, a moment of quiet reflection and joy. And as they continued to walk, Catherine knew that the love they shared would continue to grow, and that their story would be one of love, resilience, and a quiet strength that had brought them to where they were today. Their future was theirs to shape, and together, they would create a legacy that would be remembered for generations to come, not for their beauty or their wealth, but for the love that had bound them together from the very beginning.